He left me out of her will after I raised her for 20 years. Not a single dollar, not even my name. I wasn't her real mother, they said. Just a guardian, a placeholder. I stayed silent at the reading, but inside something broke. What happens when the only person you loved chooses to forget you? And what do you do when love is not enough? I thought I knew the answer. I was wrong. I was 73 the year my hands stopped shaking when I poured my morning coffee. That might sound strange to most people, but when you've been holding your breath for 20 years, even a steady cup feels like a miracle. The house was quiet that morning, like it always was. No ticking clocks, no music, just the hum of the refrigerator and the slow creak of my knees as I walked across the kitchen floor. I liked it that way. Silence was safer than most noises life had thrown at me. Alina had moved out 5 years ago, but somehow her presence still lingered. A chipped mug she used for green tea, the scent of jasmine she liked in her shampoo, her shoes I couldn't bring myself to throw away. People always say time moves forward, but in this house it hovered. 20 years ago I became her guardian. Not by blood, not by law at first, but by choice. She was 5, lost, pale. Her father, my husband, had died in a wreck, and she was the child no one wanted to claim. Her birth mother had vanished long before the crash. No one asked me to take her in, no one suggested it. But I looked at her across the hospital waiting room and I saw someone I recognized, someone who needed someone. We were strangers, and I chose her. What followed wasn't a fairy tale. There were tantrums, silence, school reports I had to sign as guardian instead of mother. Every time a reminder that I didn't belong to her, not fully. But I cooked her meals. I sat by her bed when she had nightmares. I clapped at her choir concerts and bought her first real coat. I taught her how to make chili from scratch. That was our thing. She'd say it was too spicy. I'd say she needed to grow into it. She never called me mum, not once, and I never asked her to. Still, I celebrated her birthdays, watched her graduate, helped her decorate her first apartment. I gave her my late husband's savings when she started nursing school. I didn't think twice. That's what mothers do, right? Now I know that word has rules, legal ones, emotional ones, rules never understood. You might be wondering why I'm starting the story here with coffee and silence and the weight of 20 years pressing on my chest. It's because the truth doesn't always show up with fireworks. Sometimes it creeps in slow as the sun hitting the floorboards. And on that particular morning, the sun felt warmer than usual. I didn't know it then, but within a few hours, everything I believed about the life I built with her would be tested. And that steady coffee mug I was so proud of holding would soon slip from my hands. Not because they shook, but because something else inside me broke. The call came just after 9 a.m. I remember because the kettle had just started to whistle and I was reaching for the switch. The number on the screen was local but not familiar. I answered without thinking, one hand still on the kettle handle. The voice on the other end was clipped and efficient. A woman, a nurse. She asked if I was Beverly Grafton. When I said yes, her tone shifted. Softened slightly, but not enough. She said Alina had been brought into emergency early that morning. Reaction to medication. Severe. They did everything they could, but she didn't make it. I didn't speak. The nurse paused, then began to repeat herself. I hung up before she could finish the sentence. I didn't cry. I turned the stove off. I walked to the sink and placed the kettle down. Then I sat at the kitchen table and folded my hands like I was preparing to say grace. The quiet felt heavier than usual. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice. A delivery truck rolled by. Normal sounds. Nothing had changed for them. But something inside my chest had gone still. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been 5 minutes, could have been 50. When I finally moved, it was only to pick up the phone again and call the hospital. This time I asked which location she had been taken to. They gave me the name, told me she was no longer there. The body had been transferred. Transferred. That word echoed. I wrote down the address of the funeral home. The woman on the phone offered her condolences. I said thank you like I was reading it off a cue card. It wasn't until I pulled into the lot of the funeral home 2 hours later that my hands started to tremble. The same hands that had stopped shaking over coffee that morning. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel, and looked straight ahead at the brick building with the white trimmed windows. I didn't want to go in. I went anyway. Inside, everything smelled like furniture polish and carnations. A man in a grey suit greeted me with a practiced smile. He asked if I was family. I said yes. He showed me into a side room. Alina was lying there, peaceful, pale, hair brushed neatly back, no jewelry, just a plain gown, the kind they put on everyone. I took a seat near her feet. I couldn't move any closer. I kept thinking about the last time we spoke. I had dropped off some leftover stew at her apartment. She was rushing out late for work. She thanked me, kissed my cheek. That was 2 weeks ago. That was the last time I saw her alive. No one else came in. I sat there for nearly an hour. I didn't touch her. I just watched. When the man in the suit returned, he handed me a folder. He said arrangements had been started by her partner. I paused. Then I nodded. I took the folder without opening it. As I stepped outside, the sunlight hit my face. It was too bright, too clean. It didn't match what I felt. I stood there on the steps of the funeral home, clutching that folder, and realized something that hadn't registered before. I had raised her. I had loved her. But in the final paperwork of her life, I didn't exist. The first time I saw Alina, she was sitting alone on a vinyl chair in the corner of the hospital hallway. Her legs didn't reach the floor. She had one shoe off, the other still on. Her hair was tangled, and her eyes were locked on a vending machine, like it might open up and offer her something more than candy. My husband had died hours earlier. I was still in the same clothes from the night before. I had just signed his release paperwork and was walking out when a nurse called me over. She didn't look at me right away. She just pointed to the little girl in the corner and asked if I knew. I didn't answer right away. I did know. Not in the legal way. Not even in the emotional way yet. But I had seen her once years ago. A birthday party. Quick introductions. She was 5 now, and apparently she had no one else. The nurse said her mother had been unreachable for years. No custody, no legal contact, no other relatives had shown up. My husband had named her on a medical form, but he had never listed her as a dependent. They couldn't hold her there much longer. I sat beside her. She didn't look at me, just kept watching that vending machine. I asked her name. She said it quietly, almost like it didn't belong to her anymore. I asked if she was hungry. She shrugged. I bought her a pack of crackers and a small bottle of apple juice. She didn't thank me, but she ate. That night I took her home. Not because I had to. No one made me. No one told me it was my responsibility. There were no forms yet, no signatures. I didn't have a plan. I had a spare room and a refrigerator with enough food for 2. She slept curled on top of the covers, still in her jeans and sneakers. I sat outside her door most of the night, not watching, just there. Over the next few weeks, I filed the papers. Guardianship, emergency contacts, school registration. Everything with the word temporary. I used to be a library coordinator, so I knew how to navigate red tape. But nothing prepares you for the emotional paperwork. She didn't speak much. She followed me around silently like a cat, unsure of its territory. I gave her space. I didn't decorate her room too fast. I didn't throw away the worn Gumball machine keychain she carried around. One morning I made pancakes in the shape of letters. I spelled out her name. She didn't smile, but she ate every one. A week later I found her rearranging the kitchen drawers. She didn't ask. She just started. I let her. After a month, she stopped flinching when the phone rang. After 2 months, she called the house phone our number. After 3 months, she left a drawing on the fridge, a stick figure of me, and beside it another stick figure labelled with her name. I didn't ask for more. I didn't ask her to love me. I just made dinner. I folded laundry. I showed up. No one else did. The rest of the family kept their distance. I got a few polite texts, some side comments about how noble it was of me to take her in, but no one offered a weekend. No one offered help. There was never a court date for adoption. I asked her once a year later if she wanted that, if she wanted me to make it official. She looked at me and said she didn't need paperwork. She said home was wherever the dog was, and the dog was with me. So that was that. I didn't push. I didn't expect. I just stayed. And somewhere in the silence between us, I thought that might be enough. It didn't happen all at once. Loving her, I mean. It crept in quietly like sunlight through a curtain. There was no moment when I said to myself, I'm a mother now. It was just one morning after another, one small thing stacked on top of the last until the feeling settled in like something permanent. She started calling me Bev early on. Not Miss Beverly, not Mrs. Grafton. Just Bev. It sounded strange coming from a child, but I never corrected her. It felt like a bridge, not close enough to hurt, not distant enough to ignore. At the time, I thought that was something. I told myself it was progress. We had routines, not big flashy ones, just our quiet ways. I packed her lunch every morning. She always picked the same juice box. She hated tomatoes, but liked them in sauce. She loved folding laundry, but never matched the socks. I'd find little piles of unmatched socks in the hallway and pretend I didn't see them. She never said she loved me, not out loud. But she would slip notes into my jacket pocket sometimes. Crumpled scraps with drawings. A heart. A flower. Once a stick figure holding a cup labelled hot chocolate. We watched cooking shows together in the evening. I remember her laugh during one episode when the host burned the garlic and tried to hide it. It wasn't a big laugh, just a breath with a smile behind it. But it stayed with me. She didn't like hugs, but she didn't pull away when I brushed her hair. There were nights when she'd stand outside my bedroom door and just wait. I never asked why. I'd open it, let her sit at the foot of the bed until she fell asleep. I never moved her. I'd just adjust the blanket and leave the light dimmed. Over time, she let me in without saying it. I became the person who made sure she had her retainer, that she got to school on time, that she didn't eat cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row. I went to every parent-teacher conference, even the awkward ones where the teacher looked at me like I didn't belong. They always asked about her family history, allergies, medical conditions, behavioral patterns. And every time I would sit there and remind myself to smile and keep my voice steady, because I wasn't her mother, not on paper. Just the person who knew what night she always had nightmares. The one who remembered she hated the color yellow because of a sweater she had to wear in 2nd grade. Once I made the mistake of trying to correct someone. A substitute teacher had called asking for her parent or legal guardian. I told him I was both. He hesitated. Asked again. I had to spell my name twice. He sounded confused the whole time. That night I didn't tell her. I just made her favorite dinner. She didn't ask why. But she cleared her plate without needing a reminder. There was a quiet rhythm to those years. Not perfect, but ours. When she turned 16, I gave her the keys to an old sedan I had inherited. She never really said thank you. But I found a photo of us in the glove box later, just the two of us on the back porch, holding mugs of tea. It was the only printed photo I ever saw her keep. I never pushed her for more, never asked for words she wasn't ready to give. I had already learned that love, real love, wasn't about hearing what you wanted. It was about being where you said you would be again and again, even if no one noticed. That was how I loved her. Quietly. Completely. And I thought somehow that would be enough. It was always the little things that reminded me I didn't really belong. Not the big events, not birthdays or graduations. Those were easy to dress up. People showed up, brought gifts, smiled for pictures. But it was in the quiet moments, the offhand comments, the barely noticeable looks, where the line between me and mother was drawn and redrawn over the years. Her aunt, my husband's sister, never addressed me by name. She called me the lady raising Alina, or sometimes the library woman. At one Christmas dinner, she leaned across the table and said loud enough for the whole room that it was kind of me to step in. Like I was a babysitter who stayed too long. Alina had heard it. She didn't say anything. She just picked at her plate until I changed the subject. Later that night, I found her outside feeding the neighbor's cat. She didn't look upset, just far away, like she had gone somewhere I couldn't reach. I had gotten used to the way people framed us. Strangers at the grocery store assumed I was her grandmother. Teachers referred to me as her guardian, then glanced sideways to see if I would correct them. I never did. I kept thinking if I just stayed consistent, if I just showed up enough times, the title wouldn't matter. The relationship would speak for itself. But there were moments that tested that belief, like the time she came home late from a sleepover and had clearly been crying. She didn't want to talk, didn't want food, didn't want to be near me. She went straight to her room and closed the door. I stood outside for a while, holding the blanket she always dragged around the house. Eventually, I folded it and left it by her door. The next morning, she was fine, just tired. I didn't ask. But I knew. I knew something had been said. Something that hit the bruise that never really healed in either of us. There were days I felt like a house she lived in, not a person she loved. Useful, familiar, easy to ignore when not needed. I told myself it was teenage mood swings. I told myself to be patient. Still, every time she introduced me to someone new, I held my breath. At 16, she had a boyfriend for a few months. He came by once, polite enough. I made sandwiches. When he asked how we were related, Alina smiled and said she's just someone who's been around a long time. That was all. No bitterness in her voice, no malice, just a statement of fact. I laughed it off, told him I was the resident cook and chauffeur. But inside, something slipped. That same week, I found a framed photo of her and her father in her room. The only photo she had on display. None of me. Not even one from all those years of school events and holidays and chilly nights on the couch. I didn't say anything. I went back to my room and reorganized the bookshelf. Spent an hour deciding what to do with the empty frame I had saved for a picture of the two of us. I never filled it. Some bonds live quietly. Others vanish before they're even named. I kept showing up. I kept cooking, folding, reminding, waiting. I told myself that love, even unreturned, was still love. But it was around then I started to wonder if showing up was still enough. If quiet love could really survive that kind of silence. By the time Alina moved out, the house had learned how to be quiet again. Not the silence of absence, but the kind that settles after something has passed through and left its shape behind. She had found an apartment near the hospital where she worked. Small, but bright. A third-floor walk-up with too many stairs and not enough storage. She loved it. Said it felt like hers. She brought over boxes of books for me to sort, told me I could take what I wanted. I kept the one she'd written her name in when she was 10. The others I boxed up again and sent to the thrift store. She came by less often after that. Life got busy. Nursing shifts, night classes, a new boyfriend. She'd call now and then, quick check-ins, always polite, sometimes warm, never long. I never complained. I kept her favorite tea stocked just in case. I updated her childhood bedroom into a guest room, but left the bookshelf and her old lamp. I told myself I was making space, not erasing her. When she turned 24, she invited me to dinner. Her boyfriend would be there. His name was Marcus. I brought a pie and wore the blue cardigan she once complimented. We ate at a cramped table under a low pendant light. She laughed a lot that night. He was charming, confident, easy to talk to. Too easy, maybe. Something about the way he placed his hand on her lower back when she got up. Possessive in a way that looked like affection from the outside. I didn't say anything. I just watched. At one point, he turned to her and said something about family and holidays. She nodded toward me and said in a voice so casual it nearly passed unnoticed, "Bev always makes a great stuffing." I smiled, took another bite of salad, said nothing. It was the first time I realized she was building a separate world, one where I was a detail, not a foundation. The next week, she dropped off a thank you note. It was store-bought. Blank inside except for her signature. No message. No warmth. Just her name. A habit, probably. Something polite and quick. I set it on the counter. It stayed there for weeks. Then came the hospital call, and everything changed. In the days after her death, I found myself sorting through her belongings. Her phone had been locked, but the police returned her purse. Inside was her wallet, a pair of sunglasses, a small notebook, and tucked into a side pocket was a printed draft of her will. Not a legal copy, not notarized, just words on paper. I wasn't in it. She left everything to Marcus, and surprisingly to a woman listed as her maternal grandmother, a name I hadn't heard in 2 decades. My name wasn't even mentioned. I read the pages 3 times, each time slower than the last. I checked again for any note, any side letter, anything that might make sense of it. There was nothing. After 20 years, I wasn't her emergency contact. I wasn't her family. I wasn't anyone. I sat on the edge of her bed and held the paper with both hands. I didn't tear it. I didn't cry. I just sat there trying to remember what love looks like when it doesn't leave a trace. The envelope came from Kenneth's office. Plain manila, no markings, just my name written in neat block letters across the front. I found it in the mailbox the morning after the funeral. I stood on the porch robe, still tied slippers, damp with dew, holding it like it might burn through my hands. Inside was a copy of the original will, not the draft I had seen in her purse, not the one Marcus had submitted through his attorney. This was dated 3 months earlier, signed witnessed. The letterhead read, Grafton and Ellis, Legal. The same firm Kenneth had worked with since before my husband passed. The second page listed the beneficiaries. I scanned it slowly, mouth dry. To Beverly Grafton, my guardian mother figure, and only consistent presence. Full remainder of assets, including property savings and designated accounts. I read the sentence again. Then again. I had never seen those words in her handwriting. The signature was hers. The ink slightly smudged like she might have paused too long holding the pen. The document was valid. It had been prepared with witnesses, all legal, all binding. But it had never been filed. The post-it note attached read, Found in the private drawer of my office. Not submitted. Date confirms prior to recent draft. I thought you should have it. Kenneth Fate, I sat on the porch bench for a long time, the morning air pressing in around me. My hands shook as I held the pages, not from cold, from the kind of anger that doesn't raise its voice, the kind that settles in your chest like weight. She had changed her mind. That much was clear. At some point, she had decided I mattered, that I was more than a placeholder in her story. But for whatever reason, that version never made it to court. I thought of Marcus, of how quickly he had moved, the way he had handled arrangements, the way he had already been in contact with her accounts. Efficient. Too efficient. I returned to the letter. The timeline was tight. 3 months between versions. And that final version, the one Marcus had filed, left me invisible. I called Kenneth, not to argue, just to confirm. He said he had only discovered the document after cleaning out a drawer Alina had requested to store private papers in. He hadn't been aware of the later version until it was already in probate. There had been no legal foul play, no forgery, just timing, quiet manipulation, a delay that benefited one person more than anyone else. I asked one question. Had she ever discussed the second version with Marcus? He paused, then answered carefully. She had mentioned wanting to change things. He didn't know the details. But it was possible Marcus had discouraged her. Maybe not directly, maybe just through silence. The kind of silence that sounds like agreement when someone is uncertain. I hung up, sat in my kitchen with both versions of her will spread out across the table. On one page, I was everything. On the other, I was nothing. The difference was a signature, a filing date, a moment too late. I stared at my name written in her hand, not as Bev, not as guardian, but as the person she wanted to leave it all to. It should have been enough to soothe me. It didn't, because in the world that mattered, the world of papers and courts and accounts, that page was useless. It proved only that I had almost mattered, and almost is the cruelest kind of truth. I kept both wills in a drawer by the kitchen sink. One gave me everything, the other erased me. And every time I opened that drawer to reach for a notepad or a rubber band, both versions of my place in her life stared back at me. I stopped opening the drawer. There's a kind of ache that doesn't scream. It settles behind your ribs and makes itself at home. I moved through the house like I was half invisible, like I had become part of the furniture. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was vacant. I tried to go back to routine, watered the porch plants, paid the electric bill, walked past her bedroom with my eyes fixed straight ahead. But even the most ordinary things had changed. There was an absence threaded into every corner. One morning, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at a mug she had once left behind. I remembered how she used to drink tea in the mornings but never finish the cup. I used to joke about it. Now the stain at the bottom felt like a bruise I couldn't scrub clean. I kept asking myself what it meant to be a mother. Not legally, not technically, but really. Was it the years of making lunches, the nights of brushing her hair, the mornings of sitting through school meetings smiling when teachers hesitated over what to call me? Was it showing up when no one else would? Or was it being written down, named remembered? Was love enough if no one could prove it happened? One evening I pulled out old photo albums. There were dozens, organized by year, each labeled in neat black pen. Her first Halloween, her 8th grade science fair, the trip to Cannon Beach when we got caught in the rain and had to dry our clothes in a diner bathroom. She was there in every photo. I was always just off frame, holding the camera, carrying the bags, the invisible support in the background. I closed the albums and pushed them aside. I needed to do something, not to make sense of it. That wasn't possible anymore, but to find solid ground under my feet again. I started writing letters, not to her, to myself, to the version of me who had taken in a child with no last name, no plan, no promise of being kept. I wrote about the nights I stayed up worrying if I was doing enough, about the time she caught a fever and clung to my arm in her sleep, about how I used to sit in the car after dropping her off at school and wonder if she would ever call me Mum. I filled a notebook in 3 days, page after page of memories, some small, some sharp. I didn't write to forgive her. I didn't write to blame her. I wrote to remember what was real. And slowly, through the act of writing, I started to see myself again. Not as an afterthought, not as a stand-in, but as someone who chose love without condition, someone who gave it quietly and consistently, without ever needing applause. I wasn't erased. I had lived it. Every day, every meal, every scraped knee and whispered bedtime story. She may not have signed the right page, but I had written my name into her life in every other way that mattered, and no revision could take that away. The idea came one morning while I was slicing apples for oatmeal. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet click inside my mind like a drawer finally closing. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to chase after what couldn't be changed, but I couldn't pretend nothing had happened either. Something inside me needed to be claimed, not through a court, not through revenge, through meaning. That same day, I pulled out a folder from the cabinet and started sketching out plans. Not legal documents, not appeals, something else entirely. A fund, a scholarship, a quiet place to redirect everything she had given me, even if she never said it out loud. I called it the Alina Grafton Fund. I chose the name carefully. It was the only way I could keep us both in the sentence. I reached out to a local foundation that worked with girls aging out of foster care. I met with their coordinator, a woman named Dana, who listened as I explained what I wanted. A program for young women who had been overlooked. The kind who didn't make it into the glossy brochures. The ones who bounced between homes and couch surfed through high school and never got a real birthday party. I told Dana I wanted the fund to offer not just money for school, but mentorship therapy, support rent assistance, a buffer, a bridge. Something that could change the course of a life the way showing up once changed Alina's. Dana didn't interrupt. When I finished, she asked how I knew so much about what those girls needed. I told her I had raised one. Over the next few weeks, I worked late into the evenings, writing proposals, reading grant structures, contacting old colleagues from the library days to help with literacy programming. The quiet house became full again, full of purpose, full of motion. One night, I sat at the dining table surrounded by papers and forms and found myself smiling for the first time in what felt like months. Not because anything was fixed, but because something in me was moving forward. The fund launched quietly. No press release, just a website and a small donation link. I put in the first $10,000. It came from my savings. The money I had once set aside for emergency repairs and maybe a trip I never took. It felt right to put it there instead. A few weeks later, Dana called to tell me the first application had come in. A girl named Renita, 17, kicked out by her stepmother, finishing high school while working nights, no one to co-sign a lease, no money for community college. I read her application 3 times. The phrasing was uncertain, the spelling uneven, but the voice was clear. She wanted to keep going. She just needed someone to bet on her. I approved the grant without hesitation. In the acceptance packet, there was a short note each recipient was encouraged to write to the fund's founder. Renita's letter was brief. She thanked me, told me no one had ever given her anything before without expecting something back. She said she would try to be worth the help. I sat with that letter in my lap for a long time. It didn't erase the ache, but it reminded me that love, when redirected, still matters. And even if my name had been left off the paper, it didn't mean I had been left out of the story. Not anymore. The event was small, just a quiet gathering in a borrowed room at the downtown library. Dana had suggested it as a way to mark the official launch of the fund. I hadn't planned on speaking. I was never good with microphones. But somehow my name ended up on the short program list, right between welcome remarks and refreshments. The room smelled like old carpet and lemon polish. Folding chairs lined up in neat rows. A table near the front held a pitcher of water and a stack of paper cups. The projector was flickering through the slideshow of early photos from the program. I watched as Renita's face flashed across the screen, then another girl's, then another. They looked so young, so certain in their uncertainty. Dana leaned in and whispered that Marcus had RSVP'd. I turned to her with still hands. She nodded quietly, like she already regretted saying anything. I hadn't seen him since the funeral. I walked to the podium slowly, not because I needed to, but because I wanted each step to feel deliberate. I wasn't rushed. I wasn't small. I wasn't someone left off the paperwork anymore. I cleared my throat and unfolded a note card I had written that morning. Just a few lines, enough to hold my voice steady. I told them this wasn't about me, that the fund existed because of someone I once loved, that the girls in the room were not charity cases. They were bridges, and we were simply offering them a starting point. I closed with a quote Alina had once written in a notebook, something she had copied from a textbook. Love is not what you say, it is what you build. I stepped down before the applause started. I didn't need it. At the back of the room, Marcus stood alone. No smile, no visible reaction. He wore a navy jacket and held a glass of water he hadn't touched. He approached me just as the line for refreshments formed. We stood near the fire exit, the air faintly cooler there. He said he hadn't known about the original will, said he only saw what had been on her desk. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. He said Alina had been conflicted, that she had talked about making changes, that she sometimes didn't know what she wanted. I nodded, because all of that was probably true. But none of it changed what she had written long before he ever moved into her life. He asked if I was going to contest anything. I said no. That what I needed was already in motion, that the truth had found its own way to matter. Then I reached into my bag and handed him a copy of the fund brochure. He took it without a word, read the name. His jaw twitched slightly. He folded it once and slipped it into his coat. We didn't say goodbye. He walked out through the side exit, and I didn't watch him leave. Instead, I turned back toward the room. One of the girls, a quiet one with large eyes and chipped nail polish, waved me over to her table. She had saved me a seat. I sat down, poured myself a glass of lemonade, listened to her talk about applying for a veterinary program in the fall. Her voice was steady, certain, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, not behind the scenes, not just a name on a folder, but right there, present, accounted for, chosen. Spring came slowly that year, the kind that made you notice every petal, every thawed patch of ground. I spent more time in the backyard, pulling weeds from the edges of the stone path, pruning the hydrangeas she used to complain made her allergies worse. I hadn't touched the garden in months. It was overgrown in places, bare in others. But somehow it felt easier now, like the work was part of the remembering, not the grieving. One afternoon I found a box I had nearly forgotten. It had been tucked behind the coat rack in the hall closet, sealed with brittle packing tape and dust. Inside were pieces of her childhood I hadn't seen in years. Crayon drawings, a math test with a crooked smiley face sticker, a pressed flower between two pieces of wax paper, a birthday card I had made her when she turned 10. She had drawn a little arrow on the back of it. Just one word, kept. I sat with the box for a long while, not crying, not aching, just letting it settle. The years had passed whether I was ready or not, but the love remained, not always visible, not always mutual, but still real. The fund had started gaining attention. A small article ran in the community paper. A donor from out of state had reached out. Dana said the interest was growing faster than she expected. I told her I wasn't surprised. Love, when directed outward, tends to multiply. A few of the girls from the first cohort had begun sending updates. College acceptances, part-time jobs, a photo of one with her first set of apartment keys. No letters asked for anything. They were just little signals, signs that someone had taken a step because someone believed in them. I hung 2 of the photos on the refrigerator, not out of pride, but to remind myself that something had come from all of it. Sometimes at night I still walked past her room. I had kept it unchanged, not as a shrine, but as a quiet space that once held her laughter and stubborn silence. There were fewer sharp edges now, fewer stings in the quiet. One evening I found myself writing her a letter, not to send, just to write. I told her I hoped she had found peace, that wherever she was, she knew I had loved her the best way I could, that I understood now why she had struggled to say it back. Some children carry their own ghosts. She had been one of them. I folded the letter and placed it inside the box from the closet. Then I sealed it again, labeled it simply with the year. Later, as the sun lowered behind the trees, I sat on the porch with a mug of tea and listened to the soft rustle of wind through the branches. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. I had let her go. Not because I had stopped loving her, but because I finally understood that love wasn't meant to hold someone in place. It was meant to free them, even if they never looked back. The house is quiet now, but it is no longer empty. There are mornings I wake up and forget what day it is. I move through the kitchen with slow feet and muscle memory. But then I see the corner by the window where I keep the letters from the girls. The framed photo of Renita at her graduation. The shelf with binders from the fund meetings. And I remember. I am still building something. Grief used to feel like an unfinished sentence, like I had been paused mid-thought and never allowed to finish the story. But somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't need the ending to look the way I once imagined. I only needed it to be mine. The life I lived with Alina was not wasted. The years I spent loving her, showing up for her folding laundry. She never thanked me for buying birthday candles. She never asked for sitting outside her door on nights she couldn't sleep. They weren't invisible. They just didn't fit inside a line on a will. Now when I think of her, I don't feel erased. I feel whole. I carry her with me in the way I speak to the girls, in how I answer the phone after the first ring, in how I fold blankets and leave the porch light on just a few minutes longer than needed. There's no plaque with my name, no inheritance to point to, but there's a legacy, one that looks like choice. Quiet, deliberate, enduring. I didn't raise her to be grateful. I raised her to survive. And in some way I did too. If you've ever loved someone who didn't know how to love you back, or if you've ever given years of your life and wondered if it mattered, maybe this story spoke to you. If it did, I hope you'll take a deep breath and remember quiet love. Love is still real love. And your story matters, even if no one wrote it down. Thank you for listening.